Welcome back, everyone, to the show. I'm very happy and pleased that my attorney colleague, Russell Denied, is back with us today. And we will be talking about more like children-focused in legal proceedings and family law proceedings when it comes to custody, divorce, and all kind of family law proceedings in court. Thank you so much, Russell, for joining the show again. I'm very happy to talk to you.
I'm always happy to talk with you too. So what we want to talk about today?
Yes, we're talking about how can you protect actually children, right? So
Mhm.
clients come to us every day and they want, the best representation in their case, but most of them also have minor children, right? And that's where it gets complicated, not only for the parents, but also for a judge to decide in the end, right? What's going to happen with the children? Who gets to have the physical custody? How is the time sharing model organized between the parents, right? Would you like to explain a little bit more about, what are the differences when it comes to children? Maybe because you're practicing in Illinois and in Florida, right? You have a very broad experience. Would you like to tell us a little bit more? What are the differences when it comes to children in court?
Okay. Well, there's usually three documents that get entered in a divorce. One is the judgment of dissolution of marriage, which is the actual divorce. And the judgment of dissolution of marriage says we're also going to incorporate two other documents. One, the marital settlement agreement, which resolves everything financial, and two, the allocation of parental responsibilities and parenting time. And that resolves everything around kids. And they try to separate the money from the kids because you really shouldn't be making decisions about kids based on money. You can't trade money for kids and kids for money. And even if you could, you shouldn't. So the second document, the allocation, is what you're either trying to enter or you're trying to modify or trying to enforce when it comes to kids. And there's two parts to it. There's parenting time, that's the actual schedule. And then there's decision making, which is figuring out who's going to make decisions for the kids. Some issues are really, really important, like education, healthcare. Some start getting less important, like extracurricular activities or religion. And there's could be dozens of others if you think it's important for your family about how you're going to make decisions. So you go to the judge and you say, I should make these decisions or I should have this time with the children. And the judge says, yeah, well, okay, why? And then the judge, there's usually in each state, there'll be a bunch of factors like, are you willing to put the kid's needs ahead of your own? Are you willing to work with the other parent? Is there any special needs that the children have? There's all these different factors in each statute in each state, and you sort of have to go through those and say, I should make the decisions because in the past I have always made the decisions and the kids are happy and healthy today. And the kids have this special need, and I'm very familiar with the special need. I'm the one who talks to the specialist. I'm the one who relays information to the specialist. I'm the one who understands these things. And you testify to that effect, that you are sort of an expert in how to make your kid the best kid. The other side is going to say, no, I'm really the expert. And actually, my ex is terrible. And I'm going to bring up all the times that they forgot to pick up the medicine or their lunch wasn't packed, etc. And then the judge weighs the credibility of the two testimonies. The truth is, most parents, they might be fighting, but it's really been my experience that people love their kids. It's the best part of my job is that even the most horrifically borderline personality people can often put their children's interests ahead of their own and
Yes.
make excellent decisions on behalf of their children and co-parent effectively too and come to an agreement. But those that can't have to put forward evidence to the judge. And that usually is their own testimony or maybe the testimony of somebody else who saw them be a good parent. But the problem is that some people will say, well, I know who the perfect person is to testify about who should make these choices, whose parenting time should be. It should be the kid. That is the worst person to bring into court.
Yes.
And in Florida, it will never, ever happen. There's nothing that can happen that way.
Yes.
And in Illinois, they do allow what's called in-camera investigations. In-camera means in the judge's office. They will bring the child in. Everybody has to agree to it, and the judge says, I don't like doing this, but sometimes you have to hear it from the horse's mouth. And I remember one judge wanted to see a father wanted to get some sort of parenting time with, I think, his 16-year-old son. And the 16-year-old son refused, and the father said, it's all the mom's fault. And the mom's like, I couldn't make him if I wanted to. So this judge, who was a very old man, took the 16-year-old into his chambers, talked to him, came out, and then told us, when my grandparents left Ireland to come to the United States, my grandma was 14 and my grandpa was 16, and they got married the next year when they were 15 and 17. So I have a very hard time telling a 16-year-old young man who he can see and who he can't see. And I'm inclined to just let him make his decision up. And he told me he doesn't want to see dad. And so I'm not going to let anything happen from there. If he's old enough to join the army, he's old enough to decide this. So that's maybe that was tough on dad. And I think it was maybe validating for mom, but and probably horrific for the poor child who had to like tell this to a stranger. But at the end, the judge heard it from the child, made a decision, and then the judge was able to say, no, there's going to be no parenting time for dad, no decision making because there's no communication. And I heard it directly from the child. But again, hearing it directly from the child is usually a terrible idea because I'm sure this child, who's now, the man is probably 30 years old, is now, has probably a horrific memory of something he had to do because dad was bothering mom and mom was bothering dad. And suddenly he's in the middle of a divorce. Terrible.
And a lot of clients think, when they come to us, they think, well, I want my kid to speak up. I want my kid to be heard in front of the judge because my kid will confirm what I'm saying. And they don't know that a kid put in that situation could either say the opposite, the exact opposite,
Hmm.
or say, well, I don't want to make a decision. I love my mom, I love my dad, I like to spend time with both. They're obviously very different people. That's why they're divorced or they're separated. But they can, they both make it work, and I love them dearly, right? That's usually what kids, they express love for both, so they don't want to be put in the middle as a decision maker. That's what you should never, like psychologists say, also, for children, they say you should never put important decisions on a child. The child doesn't get to choose how the people, the parents feed them, for example, because
Yeah.
kids can only choose snacks, right, or
Yeah.
fast food. So you don't make important decisions. You don't put them on the children, right? Because they would not choose the healthiest option for them, and they're not mature enough to do so, right? And also
Yeah.
nowadays, I wanted to say, back in the days, they were probably way more mature with 14, 15 than a lot of kids, not most kids, but a lot of kids today, because social media and all these things slow down, in my opinion, slow down their self development, right? And their accountability and they don't mature as fast as back in the days because they made crazy decisions. Back in the days, they got married super early. They stayed married. They have a lot of kids. They made it work, and they earned a lot less than people nowadays, right?
Yeah.
So at least for when you say that's a very rare case that there's a child put in front of the judge and the judge says that the 14-year-old has made up his mind and I'm not going to rule against it, right? It is a very bold decision from the judge, but I don't think it's a good decision for the minor, right? For the teenager.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. What we like to say is that kids should have a voice, but they should not have a choice.
Yes.
So sometimes there'll be a specialist, either in Florida or Illinois, and we'll have a guardian ad litem who represents the best interests of the kids, or we'll have a special expert that, like a psychiatrist, who investigates the kids on like a deeper level, because they know that if you ask a kid, who do you love more, the kid will say whoever they talked to last or whoever they think was here listening in.
Yes.
So you give kids a voice so they can tell you, like, dad's a lot of fun and I love dad and he lets us stay up real late. And mom's, very kind, but she's tough on us. Those experts sort of get in at the issue of who makes the real good choices for the child. And the kid is sort of telegraphing, not specifically, who should be making the decisions. But the child cannot say themselves. Kids want their parents' affection, adoration, and validation so badly, they will often say the other parent that's not giving them the affection, the adoration, the validation they deserve, they will often tease facts to get that validation from the parent that's not serving them. So they might say, "Yeah, dad's never around. I really wish he was. So I wish I lived with dad." That's not the best idea.
Yes, yes. How would you, when you had to define, the term alienation, right? How would
Yeah.
you define it for? Because people are very quick to jump to that assumption that this is actually the case in their current situation. How would you tell them? Well, it doesn't apply in your case.
Well, first of all, parental alienation is a term that was made up in 1986. This isn't something that's been existing forever, and it's not in any sort of psychiatry book because it's not an official thing.
Yes.
It is a concept where you imagine one parent is turning the other parent the child against the other parent. Does this happen? Yes. But does it happen completely to the level of true alienation where a child cannot and will not speak to another parent? That's not really in the child's instinct to be completely against a parent.
Yes.
It happens, but I don't think it's as quick. I don't think the line of causation is as simple as mom hates dad, mom tells horrible things to the kid decides that they hate dad too, and will never talk to the dad again. It's usually like multi-factor. There's some things that dad did. There's things that the child came to conclusions on their own. They are a person. They're allowed to come to their own conclusions. And
Yes.
there's things that mom did that probably are not good. But I don't, my experience and my feeling is that it's rarely so simple. We divorce lawyers, we're dealing with families. If there's a simple family, I've yet to meet them. Tolstoy said every happy family is the same, but every unhappy family is very different. And as divorce lawyers, we're dealing
Yes.
with a lot of unhappy families.
Yes, we have to deal mostly with unhappy families, right? Or with broken families, because otherwise, if they were both, accountable enough or responsible enough to find agreements, right, they would without having to consult like the family law attorney, right? So usually, what happens is they try to get to that agreement, but they can no more, right? Because the
That's right.
relationship is toxic, or at least one person is not willing to communicate, on a mature level. So, are there any cases that you can think of in your past where it was actually a good idea that you had to bring the child in front of the judge? Um, can you think? I know that it's very rare because you just told us that
Yeah.
it's not a good idea. You should avoid that, right? Even if the mom or the dad says, "Well, I want my kids to speak up in front of the judge," well, you have to slow them down and say it's not
Mhm.
recommended from my perspective. Is there an example?
Yes, I did. There was a good case where a mom and a dad were fighting about who was going to stay in the house because the child had to stay. The child was doing very well considering the circumstances, and they were in a nice school district, and they knew someone had to stay in the house to be so the child could stay in the school district. Because if they both moved, they would move to horrific school districts where the child would his whole life would be upside down. The judge talked to the child, and I was allowed to stand outside. The law says in Illinois that I'm allowed to be inside and watching, but like, who wants to have Russell Knight while you're looking at you while you're talking about your parents getting divorced? So I just stayed outside the judge's chambers, and I heard the judge ask him about like, what kind of sports are you in? Like, what are you doing? How do you imagine this would work if your dad stayed in the house? What would happen if your mom stayed in the house? What would happen? And then, like, believe it or not, the kid was like, well, I'm able to manage it either way. The child was very mature. He's like, I'll be okay. Like, don't worry about who's going to be in the house for my sake. Just
Okay.
so long as someone is there and I can still go to school, I'll work it out. I can manage that. And the judge then told the parents that he's not worried about that. And what he's going to do is he's going to find a way to make it financially, it's the responsibility of whichever parent could financially feasibly stay in the house. That's who is going to stay there. So
Okay.
whoever could provide the bigger buyout, whoever could guarantee that they could keep paying the mortgage if it couldn't get refinanced, that's who the judge was going to award it to. And they heard it from the judge, from the client, from the child. But I think that was a special case because the child, if I'm being honest, was probably more mature than the parents.
Yes. Do you recall the age of the child?
I think he was 15 or 16, but
Okay.
he walked into that judge's courtroom without he wasn't nervous for a second. I think he knew exactly what needed to happen. I mean, he'd been living with these two folks who were at each other's throats for years. I'm sure you either are going to learn how to survive that and be the bigger person, or you're going to be a shell of a person because of it. And I'm very glad that the child had the resilience to not let the toxicity he saw on a daily basis impact him on a fundamental level.
Yes, well, it's very exceptional, right? Because I see mostly the opposite, right? Um,
Yes,
and there can be very bad surprises if you're actually following your client's advice and you're not leading as the attorney that you should, right? And your client is like, so confident that it's going to happen, right? That the child will be speaking up for them. It can lead to very bad surprises, right? In the end, that the child will make a total different decision, or the child is not going to support your client's opinion, right? So,
yes,
what would you say? Also, we have to always work with, child therapists also in the court, right? Because they're always automatically also, an active part when it comes to children and minors, and guardians, of course, in the courtroom. Would you say there's in general a good relationship with us as attorneys? Or is it always you have to walk on eggshells? You try to, play nice, right? Because you want certain outcomes, or is it just, they also are some are very neutral, and some have already an opinion when they start talking to the parents. We talk individually with the parents, right?
Yeah,
How would you
it,
how would you describe the relationship between the attorneys, us as like the counselors, and actually the child therapists?
um, child therapists are an odd bunch, in my opinion. They're very nice people who are trying to help kids, but they hear a narrative from a child and a parent, and then they try to figure out the facts just like we do.
Yes,
But their goal is not a fun figuring out how this parenting allocation is going to look like we do. Their goal is to get the child into a developed state where they're better able to deal with these situations
yes,
as they come. So I've found that like you ask them questions and they don't really make recommendations
yes,
so much that help you along. Instead, they give you an interpretation of what they believe is happening based on the interviews with everybody, and then they give you additional insight into what the child's perspective is, which might be valuable or it might be pointless. A very immature child that's telling his child, the therapist, that they love ice cream every day, and that's what mom gives them. That's not helpful.
yes. But we have to always emphasize to our clients that a child therapist or a guardian who is appointed by the court, the
Mhm.
judges usually give them a big voice, right? It's not that
Yeah.
they're there for nothing. So they're not just there to speak up and the judges say, well, whatever, I'm going to make another decision. It's not always, but they usually tend a little bit to those experts, right? And then we as attorneys, if we think that's a very bad, decision, or that's not the correct conclusion that they have, we have to interfere, and we have to convince the judge or the court that their opinion is not correct in that case, right? Um,
Yes, and that's definitely an uphill battle because the court makes decisions based on the recommendations of guardian ad litems or other experts, and they take those recommendations as that being of a neutral party, and you're not a neutral party as an attorney. And so usually, in order to, if you don't like the recommendation, you kind of have to tear the person apart, and you have to go through their CV and be like, isn't it true that you went to this terrible school? And isn't it true that you were sued in 1998? And isn't it true that you didn't really interview everybody involved and all these things? And then the person who's like, they're trying their best, but like, does anybody do a truly perfect job? And then they usually fall apart. And they're like, well, you're right, I didn't do that. And if you knew, in fact, if you had interviewed these people, would in fact, is there a possibility that your decision, your opinion, the bases of your opinions would be different? And of course, they have to say, yeah, well, it was. Well, why didn't you do that? Well, I didn't have enough time. I didn't think it'd be necessary, etc. These people are not lawyers. They are not. A therapist is not there to argue with someone. A therapist is there to listen. So
yes,
it's not fun, but it's necessary to hold them accountable
yes.
for their decisions, and they're not used to it, if I'm being frank.
Yes, that's true. Now, also, they don't spend a lot of time with clients. We talk a lot more with the clients than they actually do. They have probably two or three conversations with them, right?
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
so they don't even visit them at home sometimes, right? It's like it always depends on the time frame they have and the workload. So sometimes they don't know about what's going on with the child at home, right? And they just talk to the parents and whoever they like more, whoever's more friendly, or they have just every human has a certain tendency, right? Some people we just don't like immediately, even if we're being neutral, right? It's like, okay, I treat everyone the same, but like subconsciously we have a certain tendency if we like that or not, right? And I think for the social workers, it's the same, right? They cannot say, well, I don't care about the person in front of me, right? They
Yes.
have a certain sympathy for someone, like empathy, or they don't, right? And also, would you like to share like one or two funny stories that you had previously where there were minors involved? Anything you can think of and would like to share?
I'm trying to think about because I just shared two about where there's a funny kid. It's usually sad to be honest because the kid's caught in the middle.
Yes.
And when stories are funny, they're usually something about something silly or about like some money that's not, excessive. And we have like kids that I had one person where like one of the parents said, we forgot to get him circumcised. And I'm like, this kid is 13.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
let's some things. must remain undone.
Yes,
And I just thought like that was the need for control was that extreme. And
yes,
also, and the result of that need for control would have been absurd
yes,
for a judge to make a decision about that. So
yes.
I was kind of, that was something that I found ridiculous.
Yes,
And
ridiculous. We
you,
should do that, as soon as the child is born, earliest months as possible. And
yeah, exactly.
a couple of days ago, I read that the circumcision rate for boys in the U.S. for newborn, right, dropped below 50%. It was never the case that low. So there was also an interesting fact that usually was always above 50%. So at least that's also a new number to reconsider, right? When you think about, okay, how is it developing, right? Is it religious or any other reasons? But that's also something interesting. But to bring that in front of the court,
Yeah,
15
like
years later, well,
exactly.
I guess the child is going to say, no, I don't want that anymore because
Yeah. Do you
that's
think?
it's just impossible pretty much, right? Even if you get any medical assistance to do that later, right? Over the year of three, I believe 3 or 4, you have like a very strong and more intense pain tolerance, right? And then you can feel pain much more intense than when you're a newborn. So that is also to consider, right? The parents would have had to make that choice very early, right? When the child was born.
Yes, it was clearly about control. It had nothing to do with the
Yes,
best interest of the child. And that's why I said like these kid cases don't even when it's absurd like that, it's not funny because it's the result would be frankly like horrific if a judge had to make that decision.
yes,
So
yes,
people, please like put your kid's best interest at heart. But I will also say that by far the vast majority of people consistently put their kids' best interest at heart, and they will consistently put their kids' interest ahead of theirs, and they will
yes,
sacrifice no matter how much discord or distemper they have against their former spouse.
yes.
It's amazing human experience to see how much people really love their kids.
Yes, that was an amazing talk today, Russell. How
Mhm.
can people get a hold of you? New clients that want to get in touch with you and be represented by your law firm.
Sure, if you're in Illinois or if you're in Southwest Florida, you can reach me by going to either my websites, rdklegal.com or divorceattorneynaplesfl.com, and then all my contact information is on those websites.
Thank you so much for today, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.